My name is Maxine, and at 67 years old, I thought I understood what heartbreak was. Then my only son Jake announced he was having a baby, and my world lit up with joy. I had no idea that the day my grandson was born would become the most humiliating moment of my life. Growing up in a small Pennsylvania town, I was raised believing family sticks together through thick and thin, but nothing prepared me for what my daughter-in-law Amanda would do in front of everyone that day. Before I tell you what happened that broke my heart, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt disrespected by family members who should have loved you. I raised Jake alone after his father walked out when Jake was just 3 years old. It was never easy being a single mother in the 80s, but we made it work. Jake was my whole world, my pride and joy. I worked 2 jobs most years, waitressing during the day and bookkeeping at night, just so he could have the opportunities I never did. When Jake got that scholarship to Penn State, I cried for a week straight. Happy tears, mind you. He was the first in our family to go to college. That's where he met Amanda. She was studying business marketing, came from what she called an upper-middle-class family in Connecticut. I remember the first time Jake brought her home during spring break of his junior year. She seemed sweet enough, tall blonde, always perfectly put together, but there was something that didn't sit right with me from the beginning. The way she looked around our modest 3-bedroom house, touching the furniture with just her fingertips, as if everything might dirty her perfectly manicured nails. "Your home is so quaint," she said, and I couldn't tell if it was a compliment or not. Still, Jake was head over heels for her, and I was determined to love whoever my son loved. I made my famous pot roast that night, the one Jake had always raved about to his friends. "Oh, I don't usually eat so much red meat," Amanda commented, taking the smallest portion possible. "My mother says it ages your skin prematurely." It stung a little, but I brushed it off. Everyone's entitled to their food preferences, right? They dated through senior year, and Jake proposed right after graduation. By then, I had met Frank, who owned the local hardware store. We'd fallen in love and gotten married ourselves just a year earlier. Frank was everything I'd ever wanted. Kind, hard-working, and he adored Jake like his own son. The wedding was elaborate. Amanda's parents spared no expense. Her mother, Linda, was a carbon copy of Amanda, just 25 years older, and with an even sharper tongue. During the rehearsal dinner, I overheard Linda telling another guest, "We never expected Jakey would come from such simple circumstances. But we're making the best of it." Simple circumstances. That's what she called the life I'd worked my fingers to the bone to provide. After the wedding, reality hit the newlyweds hard. Amanda had expensive taste, but entry-level salaries don't go far, especially with student loan payments. 6 months into their marriage, Jake called us. They'd been evicted from their apartment after Amanda lost her job. "They need a place to stay," I told Frank that night. "Just until they get back on their feet." Frank, bless his heart, didn't hesitate. "Of course they can stay here. Family helps family." So 8 years ago, Jake and Amanda moved into our spare bedroom. What we thought would be a few months turned into 2 full years. Frank had taken me into his hardware business by then, and we were doing well enough, but having 2 extra adults in the house wasn't easy, especially when one of them seemed to find fault with everything. Amanda reorganized my kitchen without asking, claiming it was more efficient. She replaced the family photos in the living room with abstract art prints she'd bought. She complained about the laundry detergent I used, the way I folded towels, even how loudly the floorboards creaked in the hallway. "Mom, she's just trying to help," Jake would say whenever I gently brought it up. "Amanda's got a great eye for these things." I noticed Jake calling less often when he was at work. Our Sunday family dinners became monthly, then stopped altogether because Amanda's schedule is just so packed. My son, who used to tell me everything, became a stranger in his own childhood home. When they finally found a place of their own, with a significant down payment gift from Frank and me, I hoped things would improve. Maybe the tension had just been from living on top of each other. I helped them move, arranged a housewarming party, and tried to respect their space by always calling before visiting. But the distance only grew. Weeks would go by without hearing from Jake. My calls went to voicemail. My texts got one-word replies. When I did see my son, Amanda was always there, a hand on his arm answering questions I'd directed at him. Then came the news that changed everything. Jake called on a Sunday afternoon sounding more excited than I'd heard in years. "Mom, we're having a baby. You're going to be a grandmother." My heart soared. A grandchild, the one thing I'd been dreaming of. Surely this would bring us all closer again. What a fool I was to think so. The moment Jake told me about the baby, I went into full grandmother mode. The very next day, I drove to the baby store in the next town over and bought a beautiful white wooden rocking chair. Frank thought I was jumping the gun, but I couldn't help myself. I spent hours looking at tiny clothes and soft blankets, imagining a little one to spoil. "I'll host the baby shower," I told Jake over the phone. "Just like my mother did for me when I was expecting you. We'll play those silly games with diapers and safety pins, and I'll make those little sandwiches everyone loves." There was a pause on the line too long to be comfortable. "Actually, Mom, Amanda's mother is handling all that. Amanda says baby showers have changed a lot since your day. They're doing something called a gender reveal party first, very modern." Oh, well, I could help Linda with the planning. 2 heads are better than 1. I tried to keep the disappointment from my voice. Another pause. "Amanda thinks it might be too much stress for you, Mom. They're having it at a restaurant in the city, very upscale. 50 people, professional photographer, the works." I see. My voice must have given me away. "Look, I'll make sure you get an invitation, okay? Amanda's just particular about these things." The invitation never came. Instead, 3 days before the event, Jake called to say they'd had to limit the guest list due to the venue size. But he promised to send pictures. True to his word, the pictures appeared on Facebook the following Monday. There was Amanda in a flowing pink dress. They were having a boy surrounded by elegantly dressed women, elaborate floral arrangements, and a multi-tiered cake that must have cost hundreds. In the center of it all stood Linda, Amanda's mother, beaming proudly with her hand on her daughter's belly. The woman who would share the title of grandmother with me had been given the place of honor while I sat at home scrolling through photos of a celebration I should have been part of. Frank found me crying in our bedroom that night. "She didn't want me there, Frank. She's never wanted me in their lives." He sat beside me on the bed, his work-roughened hand covering mine. "Give it time, Maxie. When the baby comes, things will change. Being a mother softens people." I wanted to believe him, so I dried my tears and channeled my energy into a project. I decided to knit a baby blanket, something special that would be passed down through generations. I chose the softest blue yarn I could find and worked on it every evening while watching TV with Frank. Each stitch was made with love and hopes for reconciliation. As Amanda's due date approached, Jake promised they would call when labor started so we could come to the hospital. I kept my phone by my side day and night for 2 weeks, jumping every time it rang. But the call never came. Instead, I learned about my grandson's birth from my niece, who had seen Jake's announcement on Instagram. "Congratulations, Aunt Maxine," she said when she called. "The baby's so cute, 7 pounds, 8 ounces. Did you get to hold him yet?" My heart sank as I realized what had happened. "No, sweetheart. Not yet." I called Jake immediately, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. "Oh, Mom, I'm sorry," he said, sounding genuinely apologetic. "Everything happened so fast, and it was the middle of the night. Amanda had an emergency C-section, and it's been crazy here. Is she okay? Is the baby okay?" Despite everything, I was concerned. "They're both fine. We named him Ethan Frank." The use of my husband's name as the baby's middle name was a peace offering, I thought. "Ethan Frank," I repeated, tears in my eyes. "That's beautiful, Jake. When can we come meet him?" "Give us a week to settle in at home, Mom. Amanda needs rest right now, and her mother's staying with us to help." Of course she was. I wrapped the now finished baby blanket carefully in tissue paper and placed it in a gift box with a card expressing all the love I couldn't seem to convey in person. Even though my heart was heavy with disappointment, I was determined to be the bigger person. This wasn't about me or Amanda. It was about my grandson, my flesh and blood. 1 week turned into 10 days before Jake finally called to say we could visit. Frank took the afternoon off from the hardware store, and we drove the 30 minutes to their suburban home with the gift box and 3 Mylar balloons tied carefully to prevent them from blocking Frank's view through the rear window. Amanda answered the door looking remarkably well rested for someone with a newborn. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and she wore a cream-colored cashmere sweater without a single spit-up stain. "Please take your shoes off," she said, instead of hello. "We're trying to keep the house as clean as possible for the baby." The living room had been transformed since our last visit. A top-of-the-line bassinet stood in the corner surrounded by more baby gear than I'd ever seen in one place. Linda sat in a plush armchair baby Ethan, cradled in her arms. "There he is," I whispered, moving closer. "Our beautiful grandson." Linda didn't move to hand him over, instead adjusting his blanket and cooing. "Grandma Linda's precious boy is sleeping so well, isn't he?" My heart twisted at how naturally she claimed the title of grandmother, while I stood awkwardly with my gift box, an outsider in my own son's life. "Mom brought something for Ethan," Jake said, noticing the package in my hands. Amanda took it with a tight smile. "You shouldn't have gone to the trouble." "It's no trouble to do something for my grandson," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. She opened the box and lifted out the blanket I'd spent countless hours making. "Oh, it's homemade." "I knitted it myself," I said proudly, "just like my grandmother did for Jake when he was born." "How sweet," she said, setting it aside quickly. "We've got a hypoallergenic organic bamboo set that the pediatrician recommended. Ethan has very sensitive skin." How she could know that when he was barely 10 days old was beyond me, but I bit my tongue. "Can I hold him?" I asked, looking at the sleeping bundle in Linda's arms. Linda and Amanda exchanged a look I couldn't quite decipher. "He just fell asleep," Linda said. "Maybe in a little while." That little while never came during our hour-long visit. Every time I asked, there was another reason. He was sleeping. He had just been fed. He needed changing, and Amanda took him to the nursery for 20 minutes. By the time we left, I still hadn't held my grandson. Next time, Jake promised as he walked us to the door. He looked tired with dark circles under his eyes that his wife and mother-in-law didn't share. It's just been a crazy adjustment period. On our second visit, a week later, I finally got to hold Ethan for approximately 3 minutes before Amanda claimed he was showing hunger cues and needed to be fed immediately. As she took him from my arms, she wrinkled her nose. "Are you wearing perfume?" she asked accusingly. "Just my regular body lotion," I answered, confused. We try not to expose Ethan to artificial fragrances. They can cause respiratory issues. Our third visit was even more strained. Amanda critiqued how I held Ethan's head, though I'd raised a perfectly healthy son of my own. She hovered as if I might drop him at any moment. When I asked if I could give him his bottle, she refused, claiming he only settles for Mommy or Grandma Linda. That stung more than I could say. I also noticed that Jake was rarely present during our visits. He was always running errands, taking a work call or napping because he'd been up all night, though Amanda and Linda seemed well rested enough. "It's like they've got a system, and it doesn't include me," I told Frank on the drive home after our fourth visit. "Did you notice all the photos on the mantle? Plenty of Amanda's family, but only one of us, and it's pushed to the back." Frank, who normally tried to see the best in everyone, frowned. I noticed. And I heard something concerning when Jake was showing me the backyard renovations. "Linda's not just visiting, she's moved in. Permanently. They've converted the home office into a bedroom for her." What Jake never mentioned that. Apparently, Amanda feels she needs her mother's support. Jake seemed uncomfortable talking about it. Things deteriorated further in the coming weeks. I discovered that while we needed to schedule our visits days in advance, and were limited to strict 1-hour windows, Amanda's family came and went freely. Her father stopped by with cigars for Jake. Her sister brought dinner unannounced. Linda, of course, lived there. During one visit, I brought homemade banana bread, a recipe Jake had loved since childhood. "Oh, we're not eating processed sugar," Amanda informed me. "But thank you for the thought." I later saw Linda serving store-bought cupcakes to Amanda in the kitchen, when they thought I wasn't looking. The final straw came when I noticed my handmade blanket stuffed in a corner of the laundry room, stained with what looked like bleach. When I asked about it, Amanda shrugged. It must have gotten mixed up with the whites. These things happen. I knew then that it was no accident. The blanket I'd made with love had been deliberately ruined, just like my relationship with my son. Ethan's christening was scheduled for a Sunday in May when he was 3 months old. Despite everything, I was thrilled to be included in this important milestone. Frank and I dressed in our finest clothes. Toomey in a pale blue dress I'd bought specially for the occasion, Frank in a new charcoal suit. We arrived at the church 30 minutes early, wanting to get good seats. The usher, a cousin of Amanda's I'd met at the wedding, directed us to a pew near the back. "Aren't family members sitting up front?" I asked, confused. "These are your assigned seats," he replied curtly. From our position, we watched as Amanda's extensive family filed in, filling the first 3 rows on both sides. Jake's cousins and my sister, our only other family, were seated in the middle of the church, not with us. The ceremony itself was beautiful, but I couldn't help noticing how Amanda's parents stood prominently as godparents, while Frank and I weren't even acknowledged from the pulpit. The priest referred to Linda and her husband as the devoted grandparents, singular as if we didn't exist. Afterward, everyone was invited back to Jake and Amanda's house for a celebration. The house had been transformed, with floral arrangements, catered food, and a professional photographer documenting everything. I tried to stay positive, making conversation with other guests and helping where I could. Amanda was holding court in the living room, showing off Ethan in his christening gown to a circle of admiring friends. When she spotted me approaching, she turned slightly away, but I persisted. "He looks so handsome in his gown," I said, admiring my grandson. "May I hold him for a picture?" Amanda's smile tightened. "Actually, we're doing family photos soon. The photographer has a specific shot list." "Well, we're family too," I said, trying to keep my voice light. She turned to a nearby guest. "This is Jake's mother," she said, not bothering to use my name or acknowledge my relationship to Ethan. Throughout the afternoon, I noticed every female guest got to hold Ethan except me. Even Amanda's college roommate, who admitted she'd never held a baby before, was given the honor. Meanwhile, I was kept at a distance, allowed only to look but never touch. As the party continued, I found myself in the kitchen helping to arrange desserts on trays, though no one had asked me to. From there, I could hear Ethan beginning to fuss in the living room. The sound of my grandson crying pulled at my heart, and without thinking, I made my way back to the main room. Ethan's cries were getting louder. Amanda was trying to talk to the photographer while bouncing him ineffectively. Linda was nowhere in sight. As a mother and would-be grandmother, my instincts took over. I approached and reached out my arms. "Let me take him for a minute while you sort things out," I offered gently. What happened next will be forever burned into my memory. Amanda spun around, her face contorted with anger. She physically pushed me backward with her free hand, causing me to stumble slightly. "Don't touch him, you're filthy," she shouted loud enough that every conversation in the room stopped instantly. The silence that followed was deafening. Dozens of eyes turned to witness my humiliation. My face burned with shame as I stood there, hands still outstretched toward my grandson. I just wanted to help." I stammered, my voice small in the terrible quiet. Amanda glared at me, clutching Ethan tighter. "I don't need your help. I never have." I looked desperately toward Jake, who stood frozen across the room, a plate of food in his hand. His eyes met mine for a brief second, before he looked away, saying nothing in my defense. Linda appeared then, a satisfied smirk, playing at the corners of her mouth as she swooped in. "I'll take him, darling. You deal with this." She took Ethan from Amanda's arms with practiced ease, cooing softly as she walked away. Frank was suddenly beside me, his hand firm and supportive at my elbow. His face was a mask of controlled anger as he leaned close to my ear. "We're leaving," he said quietly. Then louder to the room at large, "Thank you all for a lovely afternoon." The walk to the front door felt endless, the whispers following us like shadows. No one, not even Jake, tried to stop us from leaving. In the car, I fell apart. Sobs wrenched from my chest as Frank drove in silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I kept replaying Amanda's words, her disgusted face, Jake's averted eyes. "Filthy," I whispered between tears. "She called me filthy, Frank. In front of everyone." "You are the cleanest, most loving person I know," Frank said, his voice tight with controlled rage. "This isn't about you, Maxine. It never has been." At home, I curled up on our bed, still in my blue dress, and cried until I had no tears left. What had I done to deserve such treatment? How had my only son become so distant that he would allow his mother to be humiliated in front of friends and family? Frank brought me tea and sat beside me, his solid presence, the only thing keeping me anchored. "I don't understand." I told him, my voice raw from crying. "I've tried so hard. I've given them space. I've followed all their rules. What more can I do?" Frank took my hand, his expression uncharacteristically hard. "Nothing. You've done nothing wrong and you will do nothing more for them. But Ethan is their son, and they've made it clear we have no place in his life." Frank's voice was calm but resolute. "I've watched you break your heart over them for years, Maxine. I've seen you twist yourself into knots trying to please that woman. No more." I'd never heard this tone from my gentle husband before. His next words would change everything. The weeks following the christening disaster were the darkest of my life. I barely left our bedroom for days, replaying the humiliation over and over. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The image of Amanda's face, twisted in disgust as she called me filthy, haunted my every moment. Frank tried his best to comfort me, but there was a new determination in his manner that I'd never seen before. He took phone calls behind closed doors, made appointments he didn't explain, and spent hours in his home office looking over papers. One morning, about 3 weeks after the christening, I came downstairs to find him dressed in his best suit, the one he only wore for important business meetings. "Where are you going?" I asked, clutching my robe around me. "To see Martin," he replied. Martin was our lawyer, and had been for 20 years. "Is something wrong with the business?" Our hardware store had been thriving, even expanding to a second location the previous year. "No, the business is fine. I'm changing our will." The simple statement hit me like a physical blow. Our will had been drawn up years ago, leaving everything, the house, the business, our savings, the lake house we'd purchased for retirement, to Jake. "Frank, wait," I said, confused. "Don't make decisions when you're angry. Jake is still our son." Frank sat beside me at the kitchen table, taking my hands in his. "I've thought about this carefully, Maxine. This isn't a rash decision." I must have looked unconvinced because he continued, his voice gentle but firm. "Do you remember how we started Maxie? Just you and me in that rundown hardware store nobody thought would survive another year?" I nodded. When we married, Frank's small hardware store had been struggling. Together, we'd turned it around. I'd used my bookkeeping skills to straighten out the finances, while Frank focused on building relationships with contractors. 15 years of 7-day workweeks, reinvesting every penny of profit, living in the apartment above the store to save money. "We built something from nothing," Frank continued. "Not just the business, but our life. This home, the lake house, our savings. We did that, Maxine, with our own 2 hands and a lot of sacrifices." He was right. By the time we were in our 50s, Cornerstone Hardware had become the most successful independent hardware business in 3 counties. We'd expanded, hired staff, finally bought our dream home. All from our hard work and determination. "And we always planned to leave it all to Jake," I said softly. "Yes, because we thought he shared our values. Family, hard work, respect." Frank's voice hardened slightly on the last word. "But he stood there and watched his wife humiliate you, Maxine. After everything you've done for them. After you opened our home to them for 2 years. After you've bent over backward trying to be part of their lives." I stared at our joined hands, unable to argue with the truth of his words. "No more chances," Frank said firmly. Those 3 words sent a chill through me, not because they were cruel, but because I knew he meant them. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I'm setting up a trust. A small portion will still go to Ethan for his education, but with strict conditions. The rest will go to causes we believe in and people who actually appreciate us. But, Maxine. Frank's voice was gentle, but unyielding. Think about it. If we leave everything to Jake, who's really going to control it? The answer was obvious. Amanda. And by extension, her mother Linda. Everything we worked for, sacrificed for, would go to the very people who treat you like dirt. Is that what you want for our legacy? When he put it that way, the answer was clear. No, I whispered. That's not what I want. Then trust me on this. That afternoon, while Frank was meeting with the lawyer, I called a therapist my friend had recommended years ago when I was struggling with Jake and Amanda moving out. I'd never made the appointment then, still hoping things would work themselves out naturally. Now I knew they wouldn't. Dr. Harriet Barnes had an opening the following week and I took it. It was time to focus on healing myself instead of chasing Jake's approval. I also called my sister Beth, who I'd been neglecting in my obsession with trying to be a good grandmother. I was wondering when you'd call, Beth said. I've been worried about you since the christening. Amanda was way out of line. You were there, I said, surprised. You saw what happened. Everyone saw Maxine, and nobody with half a heart thought you deserved that treatment. Her words were a balm to my wounded soul. For so long, I'd been second-guessing myself, wondering if I was the problem. Hearing that someone else had witnessed Amanda's behavior and found it unacceptable made me feel validated for the first time in years. I'm sorry I haven't been around much, I told her. I've been so focused on trying to make things work with Jake and Amanda. At your own expense, Beth finished for me. It's time you put yourself first for a change. How about we have lunch tomorrow, just us sisters like the old days? That lunch was the first step in reclaiming my life. Over the following weeks, as summer bloomed around us, I reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with. I joined a water aerobics class at the community center. I started volunteering at the local library, reading to children during story hour. The grandmother experience Amanda had denied me with my own grandson. Frank was right beside me, through it all supportive and loving as always. Together, we made peace with our decision about the will and the likelihood that it would further damage our relationship with Jake. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was standing up for myself instead of constantly yielding to keep the peace. And strangely enough, it felt like freedom. 3 months passed with no word from Jake or Amanda. No calls, no texts, not even a photo of Ethan. It hurt, but I was learning to live with the pain through my therapy sessions with Dr. Barnes. Frank and I had settled into a new routine that didn't revolve around waiting for crumbs of attention from my son and his wife. Then on a Tuesday in August, my phone rang with Jake's number. "Mom," he said when I answered, his voice tentative. "How are you?" "I'm well, Jake," I replied, my heart racing despite my outward calm. "What can I do for you?" There was a pause. "I was wondering if we could have lunch sometime. Just you and me." Part of me wanted to jump at the chance. My son was reaching out. But the stronger part, the part Dr. Barnes had helped nurture, recognized that this sudden interest might not be entirely about reconnecting. "I'd like that," I said carefully. "When did you have in mind?" We arranged to meet at a restaurant halfway between our homes the following day. I told Frank, who listened with a guarded expression. "Do you want me to come with you?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, I need to do this myself." The restaurant was a casual chain place, busy enough for privacy, but not so noisy we couldn't talk. Jake was already seated when I arrived, looking thinner than I remembered, and somehow diminished. The confident young man who had once been so full of promise now had worry lines creasing his forehead. "Mom," he stood to hug me, and I allowed it, though I kept the embrace brief. "You look great." "Thank you," I said, settling across from him. "How is Ethan? He must be getting big." Jake's face lit up at the mention of his son, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him in years. He pulled out his phone to show me photos of a chubby-cheeked baby with Jake's eyes and Amanda's blonde hair. "He's crawling already," Jake said proudly. "The pediatrician says he's advanced for his age." "He's beautiful," I said sincerely, though it pained me to see how much I'd missed in just 3 months. After we ordered, Jake made small talk. comments about the weather, a question about the hardware store, an observation about the restaurant's menu. I answered politely but didn't volunteer information, waiting for him to get to the real reason for this sudden lunch invitation. Finally, after our food arrived, he cleared his throat. "So, Mom, things have been a little rough lately." Oh, I took a small bite of my salad, giving nothing away. "Yeah, Amanda decided to quit her job after Ethan was born. She says she wants to be a full-time mom, which I understand, but it's put a lot of pressure on our finances." I nodded, but said nothing. And with her mom living with us now, the expenses just keep piling up. Linda doesn't contribute financially, says she's contributing by helping with Ethan, but honestly, she creates more work than she helps with. It took considerable effort not to say "I told you so." Jake pushed his food around his plate. "Anyway, I was thinking maybe it's time I got more involved in the family business. I know Dad mentioned years ago that someday it would be mine. And well, maybe someday could be a little sooner. Not taking over or anything," he added quickly, "but maybe some kind of investment opportunity, a share of the profits." And there it was. Not an apology, not a recognition of how I'd been treated, but a financial request. "The business is doing well," I said neutrally. "But Frank and I aren't ready to step back yet." "No, of course not," Jake backpedaled. "I just thought maybe I could buy in, get some dividends to help with our situation. Or maybe a loan against my future inheritance." The word inheritance hung in the air between us. I took a sip of water, gathering my thoughts. "Jake, Frank and I have revised our estate plans." His fork clattered against his plate. "What do you mean?" "After careful consideration, we've decided to direct the bulk of our assets to charitable causes that are meaningful to us. There's a trust set up for Ethan's education, but it has conditions attached." The color drained from Jake's face. "You're cutting me out of the will, your only son." "We're ensuring our legacy reflects our values," I corrected gently. "Family, respect, kindness." "This is because of the christening, isn't it?" Jake's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby diners. "Amanda was just stressed. She didn't mean anything by it. She called me filthy and pushed me away from my own grandson." I said, my voice steady, despite the pain resurging at the memory. "And you said nothing." "What was I supposed to do?" "She's my wife. And I'm your mother." Jake ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "Look, I'll talk to her. She'll apologize. We'll work something out about visits with Ethan. So we can see our grandson if we put you back in the will. Is that the arrangement you're suggesting?" His silence was answer enough. "Jake," I said softly, "what happened to you? You weren't raised to use people like this." His face flushed with anger. "This isn't about using anyone. This is about family, taking care of family. Isn't that what you and Dad always preached? Family is about more than money, son. It's about respect and consideration on both sides. So you're punishing me because my wife said something rude when she was stressed." I shook my head sadly. "This has been building for years, Jake. The christening was just the final straw. You've allowed Amanda and her mother to push me out of your life inch by inch. You stood by while they disrespected me in countless small ways. And when Amanda publicly humiliated me, you chose to look away rather than stand up for the woman who sacrificed everything to raise you." Jake's expression hardened. "Fine. If that's how you want it, then I guess we're done here. But just so you know, if you go through with this, you'll never see Ethan again." The threat pierced my heart, but I refused to show it. "That's your choice to make, Jake. Just like this is mine." He threw his napkin on the table and stood up. "Amanda was right about you all along. You only care about controlling people." With that, he stormed out, leaving me alone at the table with our half-eaten meals. I sat there for several minutes, gathering my composure before paying the check and walking slowly to my car. I was pulling into our driveway when my phone rang again. Amanda's name flashed on the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. "How dare you," she hissed without preamble. "After everything we've done for you." I almost laughed at the absurdity. "What exactly have you done for me, Amanda?" "We named our son after your husband. We invite you to visit You allowed me to see my grandson on your schedule under your rules, while treating me like an unwelcome intruder, I interrupted. You've manipulated my son and driven a wedge between us for years. You think you're so clever with this will business, she spat. But it won't work. Jake is filing for an injunction or whatever it's called. You can't just cut out your only child. There are laws. Now, I did laugh briefly. Actually, we can. We consulted an excellent attorney who assured us that in this state we have every right to dispose of our property as we see fit. But by all means, waste your money on lawyers. You'll regret this, Amanda threatened. When you're old and alone, you'll wish you hadn't been so spiteful. I'm not the spiteful one, Amanda. I just finally learned to value myself enough not to accept mistreatment even from family. I ended the call and sat in my car, surprisingly calm despite the confrontation. When I went inside, Frank was waiting in the kitchen, concern etched on his face. How did it go? He asked. About as expected, I replied. Jake wanted money, got angry when I mentioned the will, and threatened to keep Ethan from us. Then Amanda called to continue the tantrum. Frank pulled me into his arms. I'm sorry, Maxie. I know how much you love him. I do love him, I said, resting my head against his shoulder. But I finally understand that loving someone doesn't mean letting them walk all over you. The next few weeks brought a flurry of increasingly desperate communications from Jake and Amanda. First came angry texts accusing us of being selfish and cruel. When those didn't work, Jake tried guilt, sending messages about how much Ethan was supposedly asking for Gamma, though he was only 6 months old and not yet talking. Amanda's mother even called attempting to play mediator, while subtly suggesting that access to our grandson could be negotiated for the right price. Through it all, Frank and I stood firm. We didn't engage with the manipulation, didn't rise to the bait of their angry accusations. Instead, we focused on rebuilding our lives without the constant drama. We traveled to the lake house for weekends, joined a couple's cooking class, and made plans for the future that didn't revolve around Jake and Amanda's approval. And gradually, the desperate communications slowed, then stopped altogether. Whether they had accepted our decision or simply given up on changing our minds, the result was the same peace. It wasn't the family relationship I had envisioned, but it was one I could live with while maintaining my dignity and self-respect. And that I was learning mattered more than I had ever realized. 1 year after the christening incident that changed everything, I stood in the community center. We'd helped fund watching as senior citizens gathered for a free healthy cooking class, just one of the programs our foundation now supported. Frank squeezed my hand, pride evident in his smile. Look what we've accomplished, Maxie, he said softly. And he was right. In the past year, we'd channeled our hurt and disappointment into something positive. The Cornerstone Community Foundation now provided scholarships for single parents funded after-school programs and offered small business grants to people with dreams but limited resources. I'd also found healing in unexpected places. The support group I started for estranged grandparents had grown from 3 people meeting in my living room to 20 members gathering weekly at the community center. Together, we shared our stories, our pain, and eventually our strategies for moving forward. I discovered I wasn't alone in my experience. So many others had been cut off from grandchildren for standing up for themselves, refusing to provide financial support, or simply not fitting into their children's vision of the Paytas' perfect family. The hardware stores continued to thrive under Frank's guidance, with a new manager being groomed to take over day-to-day operations as we looked toward retirement. We had good friends, meaningful work, and each other. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good. I still thought of Jake and Ethan every day. The pain had dulled from a sharp stab to a persistent ache, present but bearable. I kept a photo of my grandson on my bedside table, though it was now outdated. I sometimes drove past their house on my way elsewhere, wondering how much he had grown, whether he had started walking or talking, what his favorite toys might be. Then one ordinary Tuesday, a letter arrived in our mailbox. No return address, just a plain white envelope with my name written in familiar handwriting. Jake's handwriting. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at it for several minutes, before finding the courage to open it. Dear Mom, it began. I don't know if you'll read this or just throw it away, and I would understand if you did the latter. But I hope you'll give me a chance to say what I should have said a long time ago. I'm sorry." The letter continued for 3 pages. Jake explained that he and Amanda had separated 6 months earlier. Living with both Amanda and her mother had become unbearable with constant criticism and escalating financial demands. The final straw came when he overheard Linda telling Amanda that they needed to secure the inheritance before it was too late. "I realized then, what you must have seen all along," Jake wrote, "that I was being manipulated and used, that I had allowed myself to become someone I didn't recognize or respect. Worst of all, I had betrayed the one person who had always been there for me. You." He went on to explain that he'd moved into an apartment and was fighting for joint custody of Ethan. He was working at a construction company owned by a friend, starting at the bottom but grateful for the chance to rebuild his life on his own terms. "I don't expect forgiveness," the letter concluded. "And I'm not writing to ask about the will or money. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what you tried to teach me about self-respect and real love. If you're ever willing to talk, my number is the same. All my love, Jake." I showed the letter to Frank that evening. He read it carefully, his expression thoughtful. "What do you want to do?" he asked when he finished. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to call him immediately. Another part is afraid of being hurt again." Frank nodded. "Take your time deciding. There's no rush." It took me 2 weeks of thinking, talking it through with Dr. Barnes, and consulting with my support group before I finally picked up the phone. Jake answered on the first ring. "Mom." His voice was hesitant, hopeful. "Hello, Jake," I said, my heart pounding. "I got your letter." I meant every word he said quickly. "I believe you do. Would you like to meet for coffee sometime?" We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a small cafe halfway between our homes. When the day came, Frank drove me there but waited in the car, giving me space to handle this on my own while still being nearby for support. Jake was already waiting when I arrived. He looked different. Thinner, more serious, but somehow more like himself than he had in years. He stood when he saw me, uncertainty in his eyes. "Mom," he said simply. I opened my arms and he stepped into them, hugging me tightly. I felt his shoulders shake with silent tears. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "So incredibly sorry." "I know," I said, patting his back like I used to when he was small. "Let's sit and talk." Over the next 2 hours, Jake told me everything. How Amanda had subtly isolated him from the beginning, making small comments that built up over time. How Linda had moved in and gradually taken over their lives. How any attempt to stand up for me had been met with emotional manipulation and threats. Amanda would threaten to take Ethan and move in with her parents if I didn't do things her way, he explained. And I was so afraid of losing my son that I gave in every time. "What changed?" I asked. I finally realized I was losing myself, and that wasn't good for Ethan either. What kind of father would I be if I taught him it was okay to be bullied and controlled? He shook his head. "The day I moved out, Amanda screamed that I was choosing you over her and Ethan. But that wasn't it at all. I was finally choosing myself, my own integrity." We talked about the custody arrangement. Jake had Ethan 3 days a week now. We talked about his new job, his small apartment, the challenges of single fatherhood. And finally, we talked about the possibility of me meeting my grandson again. "He's 18 months old now," Jake said. "He's walking and starting to talk. I'd love for him to know his grandmother." 2 weeks later, Jake brought Ethan to our house for dinner. The toddler was shy, at first clinging to his father's leg and watching us with curious eyes. But Frank won him over with a wooden toy train he'd carved himself, and soon Ethan was tottering around our living room, exploring everything with the boundless energy of a small child. When he finally allowed me to pick him up, I held him close, breathing in the sweet scent of his hair. "Hello, Ethan," I whispered. "I'm your grandma, Maxine." He studied my face solemnly before breaking into a gummy smile. "Mama," he said, patting my cheek with a chubby hand. It wasn't perfect. Jake and I still had much to work through. Trust would take time to rebuild. And there was still Amanda to deal with. She was furious about Jake bringing Ethan to see us and threatened various legal actions, though none materialized. But for the first time in years, we had honest communication. We had boundaries that were respected. Most importantly, we had the genuine connection that Amanda had tried so hard to destroy. As for the will, Frank and I made some adjustments. The charitable foundation would remain our primary beneficiary, but we established a separate trust for Jake that would mature when he turned 50. Old enough, we hoped that he would appreciate its value beyond the monetary. Looking back now, I realize that the christening incident, painful as it was, became the catalyst for significant change in all our lives. It forced me to recognize my own worth and stop accepting mistreatment. It eventually opened Jake's eyes to the toxic relationships he had allowed to control him. And it led us to create something meaningful that would help others long after we were gone. The family I have now isn't what I imagined all those years ago when Jake first told me Amanda was pregnant. It's smaller, more complicated, with wounds that are still healing. But it's built on truth, respect, and genuine love. And that makes all the difference. I've learned that sometimes the most painful moments can lead to the most profound growth. That standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. That real love doesn't demand you diminish yourself for others' comfort. And perhaps most importantly, that it's never too late to rebuild what's broken, as long as everyone is willing to do the work. What about you? Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to value themselves. Thank you for listening. And remember, true family is defined by love and respect, not obligation or blood alone.